Hey guys, this is your High Fist here with another juicy video. This is probably going to be short because I don't really have any notes to work with, but it is a topic that I want to discuss for a while because I've always found it interesting, as with all my other videos, I guess. The art of the Eriksonian duel, as in DUEL, the one on one sword fighting thing, that duel. I've always found Erikson's use of this trope extremely interesting, and I find that it's something that we can learn from, not just as aspiring writers or people trying to be better readers, but just as fans who enjoy action based storytelling, right? Because as we all know, we're all Malazan fans here. We know that Steven Erikson is one of the best, not just at the major cataclysmic, magical battle and action scenes, but he also does an unbelievable job when it comes to those deep personal confrontations and duels. And many duels, rather than simply playing an entertainment based purpose in the story, there's almost always a thematic purpose to duels in Erikson's world as well, which is why I choose to use the phrase Eriksonian duel, right? Because as always, I just like adding on that tag there to emphasize how unique it can sometimes be. What I've noticed, and what I'm sure many of you have noticed as well, is that many of these seminal one on one sword fights in the 10 big books often have a much deeper symbolic meaning to them. There's some purpose, some message that this duel is serving that goes well beyond simply the scene being an exhilarating fight scene. They're all exhilarating fight scenes in one way or the other, but the actual purpose of it often, more often than not, transcends simply being an action sequence in the 10 big book. So I've tried to think of what my 5 favorite duels are in the 10 big books. I might change my mind later. Some of you might point out to ones that work better for you in the comments or whatever. But from what I can remember, there are 5 particular duels that stick out in my mind when it comes to, on the one hand, being an exciting action sequence of two sort of fighters engaged in a duel. But on the other hand, it also serves a much deeper purpose than that. So take this as my top 5 Malazan duels or whatever, right? If you want to. Or you can look at it as more of an analytical perspective on how Erikson shapes and writes this common fantasy trope, which is the duel. Let me just start off with an honorable mention first before we get to the top 5. My honorable mention would be Tool versus Mark in Memories of Ice. Now, once again, the build-up in terms of the excitement is huge. We see that Tool's a badass. We see that Mark is a badass. We see that the Seguloi are essentially unstoppable. And there's this constant tension between these two throughout the book in terms of their sort of silent quest for dominance, right, in that group dynamic, to the point where they have to be artificially separated at one point, because if it's allowed to boil over, then the two of them would probably fight, which is what happens at the end of Memories of Ice when the groups sort of disbanded because the mission's accomplished or whatever. And yes, it's a fantastically visually evocative image of these two master swordsmen clashing in this superhuman contest of speed and strength. All that's there. But Mark mops the floor with him, and that also serves another purpose, which is when Kilava knocks out Mark and she asks Tool to kill him. She says, just kill him and then no one can defeat you. And Tool tells Kilava, he says, look, you don't understand. This guy's just the third. The humans have overtaken us. It's that duel was not just an exciting duel. It was also symbolic of this era, now belonging to the humans. Tools like, yeah, even if I kill him now, there are two people ahead of him, and there are tons of other humans in other parts of the world who could probably hold their own as well. Our time is over. Our era is over. So that's just an example of how, even though on the surface it's an exciting action sequence and a one-on-one duel, there's always some kind of thematic or symbolic depth behind it as well. So that was my honorable mention. At number 5, we have another duel from Memories of Ice, which is Trots versus that Barghast chief's son. I can't remember what his name was, but I do remember the fight itself very clearly. One of the most fun duels that you can read. And once again, it's more than just a duel. It's a microcosm for the story of the Malazan Empire, right? So in this duel between Trots and the Barghast chief's son, Erikson manages to essentially visually show us the entire story of the Malazan Empire, which is that the Barghast warrior fights the Barghast way, the tribal way. But Trots almost fights like a Roman legionnaire or whatever, where he plants himself, he has a shield, he hides behind the shield, and he pokes out from behind the shield. His tactics are infantry tactics from the Malazan Empire, and the fighting style of his opponent, that's this wild, tribal, extremely skilled and formidable style, but he's completely bewildered in terms of how one's supposed to deal with Trots's tactic, right? Because Trots is using proper colonial army-based, a sort of almost an imperial infantry fighting system, right? That you can only pull off when you have a huge mechanized, not mechanized, but when you have a huge armed infantry with shield and advanced metallurgy and stuff like that. So yes, in the end, it's almost a double KO because the guy rips off Trot's throat or whatever. But it's an exciting fight scene. It's an exciting duel. And it serves, as I was saying, a microcosm. It serves as a microcosm for something much larger as well. So that was my number 5 pick. Number 4 would be, what was number 4? Kalor versus Spinok Durev. That has to be one of my favorite sort of one-on-one battles. I mean, obviously, I put it at number 4, so that's a bit of a redundant statement, but I love that fight. Awesome. The way it's written is extremely visual, and you can actually see Kalor and Spinok Durev just battling each other like these unstoppable monsters. I mean, they are unstoppable monsters, I suppose. But there's so much emotional punch to it as well at the end, where Kalor, who has spent the entirety of Toll the Hounds being so pessimistic and nihilistic and refusing to embrace his own humanity and refusing to see the brighter side of things like sacrifice and friendship and all that. Even though Kalor is the victor of that battle, the moral victory belongs to Spinok Durev. I mean, Kalor even cries when that happens, and Kalor tells Spinok Durev, he does not deserve you, as in Rake does not deserve you. As in this before Kalor knows about Rake's sacrifice and things like that, right? So that was such a great moment. It was a great culmination for the Kalor storyline. The contrast between the Kalor that we saw in Memories of Ice and the contrast between the Kalor we see in Toll the Hounds was already extremely high. But that one moment where Kalor defeats Spinok Durev and he walks away a defeated man in tears, saying, damn you all for making me feel these emotions, right? That has to be one of the best moments in the series. And because of that, it's at number 4 on my list. Number 3 is from the same book. I think most of you would know what it is because this is one of the favorite duels of all Malazan readers, I suppose. Anamander Rake versus Dasim. It's a very, very short fight if you actually go through the the sequence itself, I think it's only about one or two paragraphs, right? The entire fight itself, but it feels much longer. You feel the speed and the skill and just this build up throughout the entire book towards this moment, and you just know that something's going to happen. And even though we've not really seen Dasim in action much in the 10 big books, I mean, we saw him when we knew him as Traveler and stuff, but it's not like his badassery was highlighted before that. But we knew that this guy was supposed to be an unstoppable monster once we know he's Dasim. Just the resolution to the fight, the tragic nature of it. As much as I criticize the sort of the resolution itself, one has to admit that it's an extremely powerful moment. It's an extremely sort of well crafted storyline, right? The way that it just builds so meticulously until that final end, the way we feel the gravity of Anamander Rake's sacrifice, the way we feel the gravity of Traveler's sort of regret and sadness and grief, all of that was just fantastically done. So, once again, you can read it as an extremely exciting sword fight, or you could read it as something with many more narrative layers to it, which is the hallmark of a Malazan of an Eriksonian duel. So that was number 3, I believe. Number 2, Bryce versus Roulard. This has to be one of the best pure one-on-one encounters in the entire series. A great example of skill overcoming sheer brute force. Erikson was a fencer, and in many ways you can see the fencer's mind working here, right? Roulard is this unstoppable monster because no matter what happens to him, he just keeps resurrecting even stronger. Many have tried to defeat him, but simply because he keeps coming back, there's this psychological impact that he has on his opponents as well, where not only do you eventually end up losing to this guy, but you've been terrified into submission almost, because he just keeps waking up over and over again. And we as readers have no idea how this is to be overcome either. And here's Bryce with, it's Bryce, come on. So he displays, this has to be perhaps the best pure display of swordsmanship in the entire series. If you think I'm wrong, then you can probably correct me in the comment section. But just the way he cripples Roulard, Roulard represents a crippled god, and Bryce basically, even though Bryce doesn't know much about the crippled god and all that, at his point, Bryce inadvertently turns Roulard into Caminsword, which is he turns him into a cripple who can do absolutely nothing. And that was just a genius move, a tactically brilliant move on Bryce's part. And then we get the emotional punch that follows the duel, which is, oh God, it's all bad luck. Because Bryce then gets, you can say he was arrogant, you can say there was no way he could have foreseen that, but Bryce essentially poisons himself, for lack of a better phrase, I suppose, and Bryce is dead, and then someone just comes and kills Roulard. And it's tragic, right? Because the Tidur, including Roulard's brothers, were just ignoring his pleas for help. And they too knew that the only way they could all be safe was for Roulard to now just be crippled. Like Caminsword, even though they didn't know much about that either. So his own brothers, his own allies, just ignoring his pleas for help as he just lays there crippled and helpless, begging for help. And after that, by a stroke of fortune for Roulard and misfortune for the Leteri side and the Tidur side, it's bad luck for them as well. Roulard eventually comes up, right? So that was just a fantastic duel as well. And number 1, I think this is quite an easy pick, Tavo versus Felicin. Because even though this is technically not a grand, skilled duel or whatever, it's another example of how what is a very regular trope is turned by Erikson into something that serves a much bigger emotional and storytelling really purpose. It serves a much bigger purpose for the narrative and the impact of the narrative, rather than simply just serving as an exciting action scene, as I've repeated several times in this. So it was, I think, essential for the duel to not be a clash of skill. It was essential for it to be as short as it was, because let's face it, there's nothing Felicin can do. I think it was essential that Tavor never really found out about it, because that once again adds so much to those final moments with Tavor when she's with Ganos Paran, which many people say is one of their favorite scenes in the series and all that. It serves such an important purpose for that whole story, which is a very important story for the overall 10 big book narrative as well, right? Because the final storyline is essentially about Tavor's sacrifice for all this. And we finally see the toll that it's taken on this seemingly emotionless person. We finally see someone who's just been almost a robot this entire time, with small moments of vulnerability here and there. We finally see that there was this human being who was under tremendous pain this entire time, much like she is in many ways much more an example of Caminsword than she is Shadow Throne, even though she is technically whatever part of Shadow Throne's game, and she's a big part of Shadow Throne's plans and all that. The crippled gods inside, she suffered like Caminsword did, and we see that only towards the end. And the reason I say all this is because the power of all of this is compounded by that duel. That duel is what makes that final moment in the crippled god so poignant. The fact that she is the one who killed Felicin, the fact that after all this, after the way in which the Paran family has been torn apart, after everything that Tavor did in her power to protect Felicin in some way or the other, after all the things that Felicin's gone through, right? Both the things that she went through when she was a prisoner, her resurrection after that, what happens to her daughter, her now losing herself and becoming this elder goddess, to see Felicin now in that final moment all essentially become that lost little girl again. And Tavor is the one who finally puts her out of this cycle of misery. There are just so many layers to that, from Tavor's perspective and from Felicin's perspective. So, and that really captures what an Eriksonian duel is, that the Eriksonian duel is not so much about the duel itself, but about serving as a microcosm for something much larger. It's a device almost to add many emotional moments to the story. It's something that's done to really make us feel, because it's such a personal moment. It's something that helps the reader not just transport ourselves into that world, but to also realize that even the smallest of fights have much larger consequences, right? Yes, these one-on-one sword fights are fun and cool and all that, and I mean, guilty. I enjoy these duels mostly for that aspect of it. But there's so much more to sort of the way in which Erikson crafts a duel. These duels are not just action set pieces. These duels are very deeply complex narrative structures in Erikson's world as well, right? So that was probably a bit rambly, guys, but those are my 5 favorite Malazan duels. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope I'll see you soon.